And were no outbreaks of any diseases. For instance, in 1998, Governor Jody Rell proudly announced that Connecticut led 91% of led the nation for the second consecutive year in child vaccination rates, with 91% of Connecticut's preschool children vaccinated against measles and other childhood illnesses as of February 1998. That was just an increase from 88% vaccination rate that was reported in July of 1997. Yet no one was panicking then. According to the most recent data, the child vaccination rate in Connecticut is currently 95.9%. And this is a crisis? Governor Lamont recently stated that there was no need to panic about the emergence of Eastern equine encephalitis in our state, despite the fact that there have been 3 confirmed deaths from the virus. But we are supposed to believe that 3 cases of measles, all in adults in Connecticut, is something that is a public health crisis? This defies logic. We're asking these public officials to please stop the fear-mongering. Where is the evidence? We're asking the public to open their eyes to reason. Constitutional rights like religious freedom and public education are sacred to Connecticut citizens and should only be curtailed under extreme circumstances. Neither Governor Lamont, Commissioner Coleman Mitchell, nor any legislator has offered us evidence of such extreme circumstances. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, State Representative and Conservative Caucus President, Mack France. Mack France is currently serving his 3rd term as State Representative representing the 42nd District, which includes Ledger, Preston, Montville. Representative France serves on the Appropriations and Planning and Development Committees. He also serves as ranking member of the General Administration Elections Committee and chairman of the Connecticut General Assembly Conservative Caucus. He retired from the Navy in 2005 after serving 20 years on active duty, including 3 Indian Ocean Persian Gulf deployments in support of Operation Desert Storm and Operation Southern Watch. Representative France also has a Master's of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and a Master of Science degree in Organizational Management. We thank him very much for his service, and we are honored to have him here today to speak. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'm Mike France, and I am the chair of the Conservative Caucus. We're honored to be here today to support the Connecticut Freedom Alliance in this effort. The Conservative Caucus has issued over this last session 2 different press releases as well as a letter to Attorney General Tong on this very issue. And our focus has really been on 2 main things. First is a parent's right to make medical decisions for their children. And the second is really the constitutional rights twofold. One is the free exercise of religion, and the second constitutional right is the free elementary and secondary education. That if this religious exemption is repealed, would infringe on both of those rights. And I want to highlight the religious protection of religious freedom. That is an individual right. It is guaranteed in both the state and the federal constitution. It is an individual right. It is not an organized religion right. So it matters not what any one or more organized religions say. That right is enshrined in an individual. And that individual's right to practice their religion and their faith as they see fit. I think those are the principal reasons we are in this discussion today, is to ensure that the rights of the individual are protected. And we have issued those press releases. You can find them on our Facebook page, as well as published on individual newspapers around the state. I think that it is important today to stand up and talk about these very critical times and these issues that are of importance to individuals. One of the points that has been made, and I alluded to it, is that by the proponents, is that no organized religion has come out. So the Roman Catholic Church, mainline Protestant churches have not come out and made a statement one way or the other vaccinating children. But once again, that right is not given to those organized religions. It is given to the individual. And it's up to the individual to see fit how they protect and practice their faith. So we are here, once again honored to be here with the Connecticut Freedom Alliance and support them in their cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Mike France. Next, I'd like to invite Mary Holland. Mary Holland is a general counsel at Children's Health Defense. She has written several law review and other articles on vaccines and policy, and is the co-author of Vaccine Epidemic and the HPV Vaccine on Trial, Seeking Justice for a Generation Betrayed. She has testified to retain or expand vaccination exemptions in the states of California, West Virginia, Maine, New York, and Vermont legislatures. And she has participated in several briefings for federal and state officials. She has appeared in several documentaries and programs on vaccine issues. She serves on the boards of Children's Health Defense and Elizabeth Britt Center for Autism, Law, and Advocacy, and the advisory boards for the Institutes of Pure and Applied Knowledge, Health Choice, and the Otto Specht School, educated at Hartford and Columbia Universities. Attorney Holland has worked in international public and private law. Prior to joining NYU, she worked for 6 years at major U.S. law firms, with 3 years based in Moscow, Russia. She has also worked at the U.S. Human Rights Organization as director of its European program. After graduating law school, she clerked for a federal district judge in Southern District of New York. She has taught courses at Columbia Law School and has served as a consultant to the Aspen Institute Justice and Society program. We are honored to have her here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm here to talk about what is now a 21st century civil rights issue. People are being deprived of the right to free exercise of religion, to parent their children in the way in which they think is most appropriate, and a right to a public education, and the right to informed consent. All of these being fundamental rights that are protected under federal and state constitutions, under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and in particular under the 14th Amendment. I'm here from New York, and what had happened in New York, I don't wish on Connecticut, but Connecticut seems to be following the plan that California and Maine and New York have recently followed. And that plan is that during a winter month there is a measles outbreak, and the legislature is urged to quote unquote do something. And what they decide to do is to repeal the religious exemption to vaccination mandates. They don't repeal the medical exemption. They don't impose the mandate on the other personnel who are working in school. They actually just discriminate against those who hold deeply held religious convictions against vaccination. In New York, what we saw was without a single public hearing, the religious exemption was repealed on June 13th, and 26,000 children were kicked out of school. And simultaneously, very shortly after that, the medical exemption was dramatically restricted. It's hard to understand how that will have any impact on infectious disease spread, but it certainly shows that people with religious convictions regarding vaccines have been discriminated against. And they're being discriminated against in a way that is unprecedented. They're not even permitted in segregated schools. They're not permitted in any schools. This is a terrible step backwards, and certainly New York is on the wrong side of history, and litigation is going forward. That issue is hardly over. You're being told by the Connecticut legislatures to be afraid of people who are unvaccinated or partially vaccinated. They should be ostracized, they should be excluded, they should be marginalized, they should be demeaned, and you should just believe the experts. Believe that there's nothing about religion here. And yet, how can that possibly be true? Our Declaration of Independence tells us that the truths are self-evident, that we're created equal, and that we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Our Constitution says nothing about the need to be vaccinated, to be able to pursue our goals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are about safety and happiness. And as legislator Francis pointed out, that's a deeply individual notion. It's not something that we rely on exclusively from a government or from an organized religion. And I would just conclude with mention of the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code came out of World War II, where Jews were discriminated against and killed in the Holocaust in the millions. So the Nuremberg Code comes out of the reality of religious discrimination, among other atrocities. And that code, which was about experimentation, but surely now applies universally to treatment, is about voluntary consent. And it says that the voluntary consent of human subjects is absolutely essential, and there can be no force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other form of constraint or coercion. It is clear that it is coercive to deprive families of the right to have their children in school based on the vaccination status of the children. Connecticut, like New York, has many levers to achieve infectious disease control. It can isolate people, it can quarantine people, it can do many, many things short of depriving all children who are partially or unvaccinated from the right to go to school. So I would ask Connecticut legislatures to take a step back, take a deep breath, and think this through properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Attorney Holland. Next, I'd like to invite Kim Mack Rosenberg, JD. Kim Mack Rosenberg is a lawyer and partner in private practice at the firm of Bauer Law, LLC. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Her practice focuses on insurance coverage and related litigation, as well as products liability. She graduated from Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, and received her JD case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. She is co-author of the HPV Vaccine on Trial, Seeking Justice for a Generation Betrayed. In addition, she is author of the Parents Autism Sourcebook and is a contributing editor and chapter author of Vaccine Epidemic. She frequently lectures on issues related to vaccines as well as autism, both in the New York area and nationally. She has appeared regularly on national and local television and radio and print and online media, discussing a variety of topics concerning autism and vaccines, and has testified on these various issues to various governmental committees. She serves in leadership positions with several nonprofits concerned with issues regarding children's health. We are honored to have her with us today.
Thank you all very much for having me here. I'd like to focus, Mary Holland focused on the religious aspect of this and informed consent, and I'd like to focus on the right to education, because under Connecticut's Constitution and case law interpreting the Constitution, children in this state have a fundamental right to an education, to a public education. And that right will be taken away if the religious exemption is repealed here. In addition, children with disabilities, probably our most vulnerable children, are entitled under federal law, under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, to what is known as a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. For those children, most of those children, the least restrictive environment is a school setting, a classroom setting, where they're able to, if possible, work and speak with and interact with peers, with teachers, with therapists who provide much needed services for those children. If the religious exemption is repealed, those children will either have to leave Connecticut or parents will be forced to homeschool. For children with disabilities, that's an incredible, incredible burden for many parents. Homeschooling is an amazing choice if it's a choice that your family makes, but many of these families are not given that choice. Additionally, this violates Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That's a federal law which prohibits discrimination. One of the ways it prohibits discrimination is based on fear of contagion. Under that law, children with hepatitis B, children with HIV/AIDS are entitled to go to school, as they should be. They're entitled, as is every child, to an education. If the religious exemption is repealed, we'll be denying healthy children education simply because they aren't vaccinated according to Connecticut's state schedule. This will be treating them as if they carry every disease for which they're not vaccinated, which simply isn't true. These are healthy children. And there are already laws in place to protect in the event of an outbreak. Children can be excluded from school for a certain period of time if there's an outbreak of a vaccine-targeted illness. That law's in effect. It even rarely has to be used because there aren't very many outbreaks. And we, as Mary Holland said, we can look to New York and California to see what's happening here. As of June 13th, 26,000 children were thrown out of schools in New York State. They can't go to a public school, they can't go to a private school. For special education students, it's creating an incredible burden for them and their families. While the State Department of Education has said that special education students are entitled to services, just not in a school setting, many districts across the state, and I speak to parents every single day, often multiple parents a day, districts are failing abysmally at providing those services. There's no indication that Connecticut could handle this any better, but those children should be in school, especially children with special education needs. As of August 16th, medical exemptions virtually don't exist in New York State. Doctors are afraid to write them, parents are unable to get them. When a doctor does write one, oftentimes bureaucrats who've never seen that child, never examined the child, who don't know the family's medical history and the child's medical history, are rejecting them, and that's placing medically fragile children at risk. Litigation on the grounds of religious exercise, parental rights, the right to an education, informed consent, federal laws like IDEA and Section 504, and the right to be free of discrimination are ongoing and will continue to be ongoing in New York. There'll be lawsuits in California, there'll be lawsuits in Maine, there'll be lawsuits here if the religious exemption is repealed. This is going to deprive healthy children of the right to any formal education. It's going to force parents who can't abide by that to leave the state of Connecticut, often taking valuable resources for contributing to the state's economy with them. They'll be seeking religious refuge in other states. I strongly urge the Connecticut legislature not to repeal the religious exemption here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim Mack Rosenberg. Next, I'd like to invite both Rabbi Zev Epstein and Rabbi Shlomo Bamberger. Rabbi Zev Epstein is a writer and lecturer. He is currently at work on a book about the impact of vaccine debate on Jewish communities, with several chapters devoted to the interplay between Jewish law and vaccination. He lives in New York. Rabbi Shlomo Bamberger is also a teacher and rabbinic aide whose work brings him in regular contact with some of the leading rabbis in the country. He is collaborating with Rabbi Epstein on his current book. He also lives in New York. We are honored to have both of them with us today.
Thank you. The dairy farmer wants to milk his cows. The dairy farmer wants to milk his cows because his clients need the milk and he needs the money. But the Talmud teaches us that more than the farmer wants to milk his cows, the cow wants to be milked, because that full udder causes her pain. So I want to thank Brian for inviting me to speak, and I'm sure he wants to hear what I have to say, but more so, I want to say it because it's a message that's within that has been asking to come out, and it causes me pain. The ancient rabbinic tradition is to begin a lecture or a class with remarks, with a joke, so I would do that. You could always tell when a rabbi's going to say a joke because he says the word so. So, the rabbi is in his study adjudicating a conflict between two of his congregants. Sam says to him, Rabbi, Morris owes me $100 because we had an arrangement and then we went there and we came up and we went down and he owes me $100. And the rabbi strokes his beard and he says, Sam, you're right. And Morris says, but Rabbi, you didn't hear what I have to say, because before what Sam didn't tell you was there was an alternate arrangement and then we went left and then we came right, so I do not owe him the $100. And the rabbi strokes his beard and says, Morris, you're right. Now the Rebbitzin, which is the rabbi's wife, is in the room serving tea to her guests, and she puts down the tray and she says to the rabbi, Yankel, how could Morris be right and Sam be right at the same time? And the rabbi looks at his wife and strokes his beard and says, you know, you're right. I like this joke. I love this joke because it tells me not only what makes a great communal leader, but also the primary role of a rabbi or any communal leader. What makes a great communal leader is the ability to see two sides, and oftentimes in a complicated situation to see three sides of a complicated issue and a complicated question. So the primary role of the rabbi is to resolve conflicts within his community and see to it that there's harmony and unity and an agreement can be reached. Obviously, the rabbi is going to have to give a concrete decision about the $100, but he's so much closer to that decision when in his little study, he has validated Sam, he has validated Morris. He says we're all right. He's also validated his wife, because we've got to choose one way to go. But by validation, listening to the two sides, understanding, respect, and dialogue, that is what a rabbi or any communal leader has to stand for. His community will have harmony and unity no matter what the decision is, because everybody's brought around. And if it's not beneficial physically to one of the parties, because he has to lose money or give something up, he still does that because he wants to be part of the rabbi's community. There are tens of thousands of God-fearing, hard-working American citizens, intelligent and responsible parents who have made a simple parenting decision not to vaccinate their children. What is happening in America, what's happened next, is painful for an Orthodox Jew to witness, because I call it you peopleism. They have been subjects and victims of you peopleism. They have been vilified, marginalized, called names, and excluded from public venues such as schools. Now, they are a minority. So there's a majority of citizens in the state of Connecticut. And again, I'm coming also from New York. But I'm speaking to the citizens of Connecticut, and there's a majority of God-fearing, hard-working American citizens, intelligent and responsible parents, who choose to vaccinate their children, either proactively or by default by following the system that is in place. And that is fine. But addressing the majority, how will you view your fellow citizens? How will you view your neighbors? How will you look at the minority? If the names of the you peopleists are true, then that minority are negligent, they are reckless, they are callous, they are sinners, and they are very close to being criminals. Well, we know how to deal with criminals and sinners. Criminals and sinners are disciplined, they're penalized, they're possibly isolated, they need to be rehabilitated. But if the people next to you, your fellow citizens, are not sinners, and they're not criminals, they're just responsible parents, like you, well then, we've changed. Instead of disciplining and rehabilitating, you're actually victimizing and persecuting and discriminating by taking away their rights. So how will you choose how to deal and how to view your fellow citizens, this minority of not anti-vaxxers, which is a pejorative term, simply and more classically they can be referred to as non-vaccinated parents. And how will you view them? The first step to decide how to view them is to look at both sides, to see what is going on. Why are they making this decision? And in the spirit of respect and dialogue and community responsibility, not only to the public health, but to the public's right to education and to the great American ideal of religious freedom. In that spirit, you will be able to start the first step of how should we view our fellow parents. So while writing the book, fortunately there are many people in public office who have looked at two sides of the issue. I'm going to give you one example out of many. Bernadine Healy has a long CV. She was a professor at Johns Hopkins University. She was the chair of the Cleveland Clinic. She was the dean of the College of Medicine at Ohio State University. Dr. Healy passed away in 2011. She was the director of the National Institute of Health. She sat on the advisory committee of the National Academy of Sciences Institute of Medicine, which are both government agencies. And apparently she had a lot of free time on her hands because she was also the health editor for U.S. News and World Report and wrote a health column. Dr. Healy was interviewed, And she said that she has a lot of unanswered questions about vaccination. And she believes that there is a subset among the population that are susceptible to vaccines, and that the vaccines can cause them autism, and that the susceptibility factor and identifying what might be causing that has not been properly reviewed and researched, and there's open questions. That interview occurred in 2008, 10 years after Andrew Wakefield's now infamous paper was published. But Dr. Healy's license was never retracted, and Dr. Healy's published works were never rescinded and were never retracted. She was never delicensed. So we have to look at the two sides. And one of the things that Dr. Healy said in that interview is there actually are no two sides. She said we're all just parents looking out for the health of our children. And that's the exception to the rule that there's always two sides. The exception to the rule is core values. And when it comes to core values, there are no two sides. There is no question that we have to protect the health of our children. And when it comes to a core value, we find unanimity. And if we will listen to each other in this debate, we will hear from the commissioner of the Department of Health in Connecticut and from the governor, we're saying the same thing. We want to protect the children. So now we have a doctor who comes and says, we've got an immunocompromised child in a classroom. I want to protect the children and make sure that an unvaccinated child doesn't sit next to her. And you know what? He's right. But now we have Dr. Healy telling me that if you give a child a shot, you might be pushing him over the edge into autism. And you know what? She's right. So now we have a legislator, and he's saying, well, what should I do? Do I put the two kids together or not? And I say to the legislature, you know what? You're right. We're not here to give you answers. I'm not here to give you answers. I'm here to help you ask the question. Is there a way? Is there a way to resolve that conflict in a spirit of tolerance, in a spirit of unity, so that we can move forward? So one of the answers to the question was given over to me by a fellow Orthodox Jew who is a lawyer and is also in a leadership position in Agudath Israel of America, which is the political advocacy group for Orthodox Jewry. It's a national, our national institution that fights for the civil and religious freedom of the Jewish community, both in this country and across North America. And he said that he's not giving me a position on vaccination because that's not his role. He's a political leader. As a political leader, he has to be concerned for any minority within his constituency that are not vaccinated. And he told me to please say over that the position of the Orthodox community is such that religious freedoms cannot be compromised. And he as well does not see a compelling reason to compromise the religious freedoms in this case. He said the position of Agudath Israel has always been that the sacrosanct, hallowed institution of religious freedom in this country should be preserved not at all costs, but in order to compromise it, we need a very compelling reason that he does not see. He looks at the repeal of the religious exemption in the state of Connecticut, and the numbers from what I understand them is approximately 1,600 or 1,700 children who have that exemption. He said to repeal that religious exemption in order to protect the public health is like shooting a cannonball at a fly. Are you really using this drastic legal step properly in order to achieve the goal that you want to achieve? So, that's not my primary goal, actually. That's not why Brian called me here today. That's sort of just a little bit what was on my mind. What we want to state clearly and unequivocally, and Rabbi Bamberger will elaborate, is that we are in contact with Orthodox rabbis who have given forth a clear ruling that, firstly, vaccination is not obligatory according to Jewish law. Secondly, it's a parental right to choose to vaccinate your children or not. And thirdly, our communal institutions, such as schools and synagogues, should not exclude non-vaccinated children. That is the Jewish law that has been given over by many rabbis. So we again have, just like statements like the science is not settled or no further research is necessary, that's not particularly scientific. And that the Jewish law is settled and there's unanimity with all the rabbis, that's also not accurate. There's a range. The rabbinic view on vaccination, the Orthodox Jewish rabbinic view, and that is what we have come here to report to you, it follows a range. There's a spectrum. There are those who feel that it is obligatory. There are those rabbis who feel that it is neither obligatory nor forbidden, and there are actually rabbis who feel that vaccination is forbidden. In the middle group, once we move into the middle group, that vaccination is neither obligatory nor forbidden, then we move into the further question about Jewish feeling, Jewish belief, and Jewish ethics, which is also part of a religious exemption. A religious exemption does not have to be based on the legal permissibility or actual being forbidden in terms of Jewish law. In that broad middle category, there are those who feel that it is a wrong thing to vaccinate, and there are those who feel that it is a fine thing to vaccinate, and they're both based on the Jewish religion. So, I'd just like to conclude. In the writing of my book, I took a good look at other books that are out there, and I wanted to look at the two sides. I've looked at this book, which is by Dr. Paul Offit. Dr. Offit is arguably one of America's foremost proponents of vaccination, and he's written a very nice book. It's actually a very impressive book. I enjoyed reading it, and it's full of information. And then I read this book. It's called How to End the Autism Epidemic by J.B. Handley. And many of the issues that are dealt with in these two books show you the two sides. So as a rabbi, I was required to read both of these books because my book is supposed to be educating rabbis on the debate. So I want to read both books. I want to see both sides so that my readership can say, I've done due diligence to find out what is going on. I'd like to quote from you from Dr. Offit's book, where he puts there an entire chapter on trust. When parents choose to vaccinate their children, one element is critical to the decision: trust. A choice not to vaccinate is a choice not to trust those who research, manufacture, license, recommend, promote, and administer vaccines, specifically the government, pharmaceutical companies, and doctors. If we are to believe that vaccines are safer than the diseases they prevent, we're going to have to trust those responsible for them. This isn't going to be easy. And I agree with Dr. Offit. You are right. This is not going to be easy, because I'd like to go through your list. The trust in terms of pharmaceutical companies is very, very misplaced. Pharmaceutical companies are not part of the medical establishment. They are part of industry. Their mandate is to make money. They're ethically and morally bound to their shareholders and their stockholders, the people who gave them money to make money. That is their mandate. There is no trust for an industry provider. You don't trust your mechanic. You check your bag and you make sure that he's not lying. You trust him as a human being. But if you don't know any of the people running the companies, you can't trust them as a human being, and on a professional level, there's no trust in capitalism. The doctors, and trusting in our doctors is also not an element, and Rabbi Vanderbilt will elaborate on this. It's not a built-in element. You have to establish a relationship with your doctor. And Robert Mendelsohn, who wrote many, many years ago, was a scientist. And I want to ask him, how much trust and belief does he put across his desk? There is no place for trust in science. The final one is the government, and I would speak now not as a rabbi, not as an Orthodox Jew, but as an American citizen. My family has been in this country. I am the 7th generation American born to my family on my mother's side. So I'm speaking as an American citizen. The founding fathers, to a man, believed in God. But what they wanted to do was establish a country that everyone could worship as they believed. And they had to protect the right of the atheist not to believe, as well as the right of the believer. But they did not mean to establish a country based on atheism. They meant to establish a country based on democracy. And the only way to do that is when you make a country that's based on checks and balances. So there is no trust in a government. It's not American. Democracy in America is based on checks and balances within the system, and the greatest check and balance is within the citizenry, because this is government by the people and for the people. And that means that the government, it's un-American to give that right and to give that watchdog power away to the government. It's not what the Founding Fathers had in mind when they established this country. They did tell us in whom to trust, and they wrote it on the dollar bills. And in terms of the government, they want us, many hundreds of years later, to check and balance so that we don't have a repeat of tyranny, religious tyranny, and intolerance, and that people like me, my family, can live in this great country for 7 generations and going forward. So we're here to state unequivocally, again, as we said, that there are Orthodox rabbis who obligate people to vaccinate. There are many Orthodox rabbis who view vaccination as neither obligatory nor forbidden, and that it is a parental right. Parents should do their research and make their own decisions, and that communal institutions should not exclude non-vaccinated students. And finally, there are rabbis who actually go so far as to forbid vaccination. My colleague will elaborate on those 2 points, but that means that if a citizen in the state of Connecticut submits a religious exemption letter stating, I am Jewish, and my sincerely held belief opposes vaccination for my children, that is a valid document. That is plausible. There is much room and much basis in the Jewish faith to support that statement and that letter. Thank you.